USA Health Products Regulatory Authority has now granted permission for what's called the commercial rollout of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. In other words, the safety trial, the Sisonke trial that we've seen, can now end, and the vaccine can be rolled out to everyone. Earlier this week, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that 30 million Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses have been ordered from the pharmaceutical company. 20 million will come from Pfizer. One of the people who's been running the Sisonke trial is Professor Amina Goga from the SA Medical Research Council. Professor, good afternoon to you. I mean, this is a really important announcement from the Health Products Regulatory Authority. It's really good news.
Yes, good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to your listeners. It's very exciting news for all of us.
It does mean, I presume, that the rollout of vaccine doses can now actually speed up pretty quickly. You don't have to be quite as careful as you have been. You don't have to limit who gets this. Obviously, healthcare workers must get it first. I suppose, in a way, to use an analogy, we can go from first gear into second and third.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And I think the main limiting factor now is how quickly we can get these commercial doses into the country. And we've heard good news from the President 2 nights ago. And so we're hoping that the first tranche can be delivered in country around the middle of April, so that all systems can be ready to go by the end of April, and we can start with the national rollout program.
This may seem like a sort of silly technical question, but I think it might be important. The vaccine doses that healthcare workers have been getting up until now, we saw the President get one, we saw the Health Minister get one, we've seen the MECs get them, but more importantly, we've seen nurses and doctors getting them. The vaccine that was injected into their arms, is it going to be exactly the same stuff? I know that's not a medical word, but is it going to be exactly the same stuff that is then going to be as part of the commercial rollout, or phase 2 and phase 3?
Yeah, it's the same vaccine, so the constituents are the same. The agent that we use to induce immunity is the same. It's just that the concentration is different. So the vaccine that we've been using for the Sisonke study is still the J&J. It uses the same Ad26, the same vector, the same spike protein, but it's quite concentrated. And so the dose that we've been using are part of research doses, and the dose has been 0.25 moles. Whereas I think the commercial doses are slightly weaker. Not that they're not weaker in effect, they're just less concentrated, and so the dose will be slightly higher. But that often happens with medication. You know, one has to just make sure you know the amount of active ingredient available in it, and then you draw up the required dose. So it's not something that's unusual in the practice of medicine. You know, you need to know the strength. For children, you can get Augmentin, which is an antibiotic, and you can get the reduced strength, or you get the higher strength, and that affects the dose. So for older children, you want a smaller dose, so you will take the higher concentration, so you can give more in 5 moles. So it's a similar concept.
It's a bit like drinking Oros for the first time. The first time you have it, you always pour way too much in, and then you realize that you can actually live with a little bit less. The efficacy rates, and I don't want to get too caught up in maths, wasn't my strong point, but from what I can see and from the statement that was put out by Johnson & Johnson today, they said that the data demonstrated the vaccine was 85% effective in preventing severe disease and hospitalization. I mean, that's quite a high efficacy rate. Well, it sounds high.
It is high, yes. It's been very good, and in particular, it's the protection against severe disease that is the strong point, and that's why we'd like all healthcare workers to be protected before or ahead of the third wave. The 85% is the protection against severe disease, and then there's been 100% protection against death. And so that's really important and significant, not just for the health sector, but also for the general population at large.
And presumably, and we've got to get our variants and sort of line them up in this, because the variant that's currently dominant in this country, the variant which still doesn't have a very good name but was first found here, this data is about that variant, right?
That's correct. So in the original J&J study that was done in South Africa as well, we contributed approximately 6,000 people to the study. And more than 95% of those people who had breakthrough infections had infections caused by the new variant, or the 501YV2 or the B1351 variant. And so that made it possible to test the effectiveness of the vaccine against this variant. And it performed very well. So, for example, in South Africa, we had 57%, almost 60% protection against moderate to severe disease through the J&J vaccine. And that was using real samples from people who had been enrolled in the ensemble study, which was the J&J study that we conducted here between September and around December last year.
So obviously vaccinating our community and vaccinating our people it's got several stages to the process. The first is coming up with a vaccine that we know works against the variant that we have to worry about, and this is the news that we've had today. You, I think, probably have known this for some time, that this vaccine works, but now we have the official sort of stamp of approval from the regulator. The second step is actually getting it from there and, frankly, into my arm. Yes. That means that exactly. there's a lot of work to do. And when you started, I think, with, just a couple of sites on the first day. You've ramped that up quite dramatically. You started with, a few hundred injections a day. You've ramped it up very quickly.
Yes. When someone first said that you need to do 500 vaccinations a day, I thought to myself, never. I don't know how we'd ever do that. And we started, as you say, with 18 hospitals, and then we had clinical research sites attached to the hospital. And just by improving efficiencies and making sure we had processes in place, we have different stations, we were actually able to ramp up to vaccinating 1,000 people a day, and that includes the 15-minute observation period. Some sites were able to do 1,200, and I think the maximum was at Baragwanath Hospital, where they managed to do 2,200 a day. And this is just in a study. We used whatever facilities were available. They were halls, sometimes they were wards, they were corridors. And so we really made do with whatever was available. And I think the trick is to develop the system. So how many desks do you have, or how many spots do you have when people come in? You need to do the registration. They then move on to wait for the vaccination, and then move on to wait for observation. And I think the Sisonke studies really taught us how to do this. We've also managed to test the EVDS, which is the electronic vaccine delivery system, which will be used for the national rollout. And so over the past almost month, or just over a month, we've been using the EVDS. I think we've ironed out a lot of the little problems, when you use the electronic systems, the little issues that arise. And so I think the EVDS now is well poised for a massive, huge vaccination campaign or rollout. I think one does need internet connectivity to make it easier, so that you get everything going into the system real time. You check people's details real time, and you give confirmation of vaccination real time as well. So we've tested all those systems. I really think it's possible to ramp up to more than 2,000 a day. You just need large spaces. You need a large number of vaccinators. And most importantly, you need the people, so pharmacists, to draw up the vaccine. That was often the rate limiting step. How many vaccines can pharmacists draw up in an hour? We got up to 120 in the site that I was at. But as I said, Baragwanath got up to 2,000 people per day. And so I think we're really well poised. We've learned so many lessons from the Sisonke study that, we've been working with the National Department of Health, with the private sector. And so we are so well poised for the rollout. Now we just have to think rollout and plan for the receipt of the rollout vaccines.
So up until now, really it seemed to me at least that the sort of handbrake, the bottleneck, maybe a better phrase, has been getting the doses here. I'm going to come to that in a moment. But you talk about the pharmacist having to draw down the vaccine. What do you mean? Does that have to be a qualified pharmacist? Are we going to have to ask some of the chains to lend us some of theirs? Can you, is there a course someone can go on to learn how to do it in a month to help?
Yeah. So I think with the rollout, it's slightly less complicated than it was in the Sisonke study, because in the Sisonke study, because it was a research study, we needed all pharmacists who are drawing up product, or anyone who's drawing up product, to be GCP trained, and that means good clinical practice, which is a course that accredits you to say that you're now accredited to do this piece of research. You know how to do all the documentation, and someone has observed you, and they know that you're drawing up the dose correctly. And because it's research, we have to have a paper trail. And so it was quite strict with the Sisonke study. With the vaccine rollout, one doesn't need GCP accredited pharmacists. So anyone who's used to drawing up medication can then be responsible for drawing up the vaccine from a syringe, from a vial into a syringe, in the same way as nurses draw up vaccinations for children. It can be nurses, it can be pharmacists. And I think the discussion now is how should that happen? Should every nurse sitting at a vaccination table, should they be responsible for drawing up their own syringe from the vial on their desk? Or will that take too long? Should you have a centralized place in the facility, the vaccination facility, where a group of people, whether it's nurses, pharmacists, whoever's accredited as far as their scope of practice is concerned with the relevant councils, where they can draw up vaccines in bulk, label them, and then distribute them to the different desks or vaccination stations. So I think those are the kind of discussions that we're having at the moment. And what we suggested is that let's do a simulation. Let's set up a room, let's try out different models and see which model is most efficient. And then let's see if we can go with that model for the vaccine rollout.
So then the other bottleneck, of course, is getting the vaccine doses. We know about the Aspen factory in Gqeberha. It hasn't started producing yet, as far as I know, unless you know if it has. But
no, not yet.
So we're kind of then still waiting for deliveries. I know another delivery coming next week. People talking about phase 2, I think, from the beginning of May. In other words, people who have comorbidities more vulnerable to the disease from the beginning of May. Do you think we'll be able to stick to that target?
I'm hopeful. I think we could very well be able to. And I think that, there's positive news coming through about the agreements that have been signed. In the delivery of the doses for the Sisonke study, they've always been on schedule. We've received doses whenever we've been promised doses, and so I really think that it will happen. I think in the meantime, while we're waiting for the doses, we must get our systems ready, and we must make sure we know how we're going to plan and book people for vaccination. So are we going to book them in 2-hour slots? Are we going to do shorter slots of half an hour? Because what we don't want is people gathering outside a vaccination center, waiting for vaccination, and then you have, crowds of people, and it's difficult to maintain social distancing. So we have work to do between now and then. So the time is going to be well spent, but I am hopeful. And I think that a lot of the lessons that we learned in the Sisonke study will inform the rollout. I'm also happy to say that we're getting another 200,000 doses for the Sisonke study. So this is still the J&J vaccine in the next few days, so probably 5 to 10 days. And so that will also kind of see us through while we're planning for the larger vaccine rollout and while we're planning the systems to implement the vaccine rollout.
Professor, the obvious question I have to ask, right? How can I make sure the people in my family are signed up for this? Is there any way to sort of make sure that you can be part of the process at this stage, to get on a list somewhere? Or do we need to wait a little bit longer for all of that to be sorted out?
Yeah, I think everybody's asking that question. I got asked that question this morning. I also have family members waiting to be vaccinated. There was a message that went out a while ago, but I think it went out in error, asking people over the age of 60 to register. So I think some people have registered. That part of the system hasn't been activated yet. And I think, I know that discussions are underway to send out messages in the next few weeks to ask people to register. Once people are registered, then, and once we know which are the vaccination sites that are going to be activated, then it's likely that because this is such a huge rollout that there will be an automatic scheduling process. We have piloted the automatic scheduling process on the EBDS during the Sisonke study. It works. We've seen how it works. You can go in, you can alter the schedule, you can indicate how many you'd like to book for a particular time slot. And so I think give it a few weeks, maybe a week or two, and I'm pretty sure that more information will come out into the public domain as to what the next steps would be. And then, the schedules will start to be set up. I think because it's so large, manual schedules would not be preferred. We'd prefer automated schedules.
Indeed, Professor Amina Goga, thank you very much indeed. If I may say, congratulations, really important news that that authorization from the Health Products Regulatory Authority. Professor Amina Goga is the Principal Investigator of the Clinical Trials Unit of DSA Medicines Research Council.